TwoStar's long-awaited Choo Choo Charles was just released on Steam, and there's a lot of pretty cool stuff to cover, so let's get straight into it. Choo Choo Charles is a horror game inspired very loosely from Thomas the Tank Engine's personification of trains, except in this world, instead of the train being a human, it is a demonic creature straight from my nightmares. The main storyline begins with an introduction to the character Eugene, voiced by Dean Moore Butler, who has escaped from the island to collect you from the mainland and show you where you can collect your train from, and immediately after you do, you meet Charles for the first time, in a scripted fight where Eugene is immediately eaten. Not exactly how I expected the introductory scene to go, but unexpected twists and turns is exactly how the rest of the game goes from here. It's also worth noting how well the voice acting has been done in this game, and it does make it hard to remember that this game is made just by a YouTuber in over a year, since all of the voice actors do an amazing job conveying the characters' emotions in a way that I would say is on par with a lot of the AAA games I've played recently. Although taking away from this is the fact that you have to manually click through the NPC's voice lines, which works well in old Nintendo games like Pokemon where the characters aren't actually speaking and are just putting text on the screen, but it feels a bit odd to have to click through vocal messages, especially since the only prompt that the messages ended is the audio cutting out. Not the worst thing in the world, but it is a bit annoying for the first hour or so of gameplay until you get used to it. Moving on to the main sector of the storyline, it is based around 3 special eggs that are suggested to be Charles's children, and how your objective as the player is to break into guarded mines and steal these eggs to later be sacrificed to a temple. These missions are based around sneaking through tunnels and mines without being spotted by spider cultists with shotguns so as to prevent being shot, stealing the eggs and then running as fast as your little legs can carry you, which luckily is quite fast thanks to the sprinting mechanic. These missions are really good fun and made me completely forget about Charles until I'd emerged from a mine being chased and hit the telltale sign of Charles's horn letting me know he was nearby. This would boost my heart to a range of beats per minute I'd usually require a pretty substantial amount of caffeine to reach. Although as much praise as I give these missions, the third mission within the temple seemed significantly harder for me to complete than the other two, and I didn't manage to do so without triggering any enemies, and just ended up sprinting down the tunnels praying I went the right way, which to be fair was still pretty fun. Following along from this, the casual whistling of the enemies to be used to try and detect if they were about to come around the corner I was hiding behind, and the voice lines of those same enemies as soon as I was spotted were a massive positive side from my perspective. I knew immediately after one of those voice lines played that I'd been spotted, even on the first occurrence of it happening, and it really kicked my fight or flight into reaction. The only other non-finale required mission is one where you set up some explosives on an old wooden bridge on the side of the island, and an NPC telling you that they will be watching to blow Charles sky high if they ever cross it, and although this setup isn't crazy exciting, it is incredibly nice to see Charles avoid this bridge in any scenario that isn't the finale so as to prevent a plot hole, even if he is just generally chasing you. On the topic of general chases, these are pretty cool and occur approximately every 5 to 15 minutes, and are always started by the sound of Charles' horn blowing, although some of the scenic sounds do sound a bit like this, so there are multiple occurrences of me leaving my train, thinking I heard Charles' horn and then immediately running back. But don't think this means it wasn't his horn, because there were also times like this, where I saw about 3 pixels of red on the edge of my screen and instinctively went back, and after reviewing footage confirmed that it was in fact Charles. The next stage of the main storyline is the finale, but first let's cover some other aspects of the game. Starting with customization, there is a surprisingly large amount of customization in Choo Choo Charles, with 10 different colours for your train, 4 guns, 3 upgrade types, and 10 levels per upgrade type, meaning that there are 40,000 different configurations your train can have. The 4 different gun types are the Derailer, a base machine gun that shoots fast but doesn't do much damage, Bug Spray, the flamethrower that shoots fast, does low damage but slows Charles down a lot, which makes it really overpowered compared to the other 3. So overpowered in fact that it is basically the only one I use. Boomer, a rocket launcher that does a lot of damage but is very slow to shoot, and Bob, a long-range, slow shooting and high damage gun that is the only real long distance option. There's then 3 upgrade types, speed, damage and defense, where each one can be leveled up from 1 to 10 levels using scrap metal and are all pretty valuable, so I just found myself upgrading all 3 by 1 level at a time before upgrading them again. Then there's 10 different colours, of which 9 can be found throughout the map in various places and 1 comes on your train pre-applied. In my playthrough I found 5 and the bright pink just looks too swag not to use, but there were some pretty cool alternative options. Moving on to the optional missions, of which there are a good selection, although most of which are just useful for getting scrap to upgrade your train. There are 2 that are really good and I'm going to talk about. These are the Boulder's Field mission and the Swamp mission, both of which are in the middle of the map a few hundred meters away from any train tracks, which immediately raises red flags, and since it requires you to leave your safety in exchange for facing the unsafe outdoors where Charles could be anywhere. Although this is where I came up with the method of forcing a confrontation with Charles by blowing my whistle whilst driving around the island until he came to fight me, and then hitting him for the approximately 40% of his health it takes to scare him away, and then driving straight back to where the mission was and doing it, so as to try and prevent from being hunted by Charles in the middle of one of those missions. Starting with the Swamp mission, where all you have to do is cross a swamp to a center island to collect a fish for a witch, and then cross back again. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, I forgot to mention that there's also a swamp monster, which is constantly following you, and if you move while it's too close to you, it will immediately kill you. This adds a very contrasting objective of moving incredibly slowly and patiently whilst trying to do so quickly as to limit limit the amount of time you are completely vulnerable to Charles, which really makes this otherwise basic minigame quite enticing. Now for the Boulder's Field mission. This one is really something. The objective here is to collect 8 pages from a quarried field and then return them to an NPC nearby, except there is something dark lurking in the fields. This seems a bit like it was vaguely inspired by Slenderman, although the unknown creature in these fields doesn't actually directly kill you, it just makes it so you are much more likely to be killed by Charles during these encounters. I won't specify exactly how, since this mission is really good fun, and the first time the creature uses their ability, it shocked me quite substantially, so I hope it will give you a good surprise too. This mission actually ended up taking longer than any of the egg missions, and left me very satisfied after an approximately 20 minutes completion time, before I suddenly realised I was completely stranded hundreds of meters away from my train, and the tension of the situation immediately sunk in. Now it's time to talk visuals. Choo Choo Charles looks incredibly good for a game of this scale, even compared to some of the alpha footage in TwoStar's earlier videos. Although these visuals do come at a price, at the epic settings that the game loaded in, my mid-range computer from 2019 was not having an amazing time, averaging around 40 to 50 FPS with the larger scenes and longer views going as low as 20 FPS. Although I found by setting the graphics on everything to medium except for shadows, which I kept at high, I couldn't notice a massive difference in visuals, and my FPS stayed at around 70 FPS with minimums at 45 while recording in full quality. This means that if your computer is on the much older scale or is just lower spec, you might not have a great time, although I didn't actually try low settings, so that might improve your chances. And to be fair, as long as you are getting above 30 FPS, you should be fine, because I'm mainly used to playing on low settings, so I get the full 165Hz that my monitor supports, and I could play completely fine on 40 to 50 FPS, and it felt pretty natural. Now, just before we move on to the finale of the main story, there are a few more things to mention. It took me just over 3.8 hours to complete the entire game, which, bearing in mind I was somewhat speedrunning so I could get this review out on time, massive thanks to TwoStar for giving me a key 2 days before the launch, by the way, means that a casual playthrough would probably take 5 to 6 hours to complete everything, apart from collecting all the paint colors, since that is the only thing I did not do, so I don't know how long that would take. The game has achievements from launch, which is very nice to show off if you do complete the entire game, since as far as I'm aware, you get an achievement for all of the missions you complete, so it's pretty easy to tell if you've just done the bare minimum or all the side quests. And also, your custom train comes up on the main menu, which isn't really that important, but I thought it was very cool, so I wanted to mention it. Okay, it's finally time to talk about the ending. Although I do have to mention that this section contains spoilers for the finale of the game, so if you don't want to know what happens, please skip to the final thoughts section shown on screen. After collecting all 3 eggs and making your way up into the temple, a cutscene begins, where you place 2 of the 3 eggs into the temple before Warren the mining boss is shown, who attempts to convince you not to place the final egg into position, but you do regardless, and it is immediately revealed that Warren is also very scared of Charles. He might still be a cultist, but what is important is he knew that you placing all 3 eggs into the temple would create a beam of energy so powerful that it converts Charles into Hell Charles. Hell Charles then consumes many of Warren's men, and even Warren himself, and the cutscene ends with you in your train and Hell Charles about to attack. This then begins the final fight, where you must use all of your upgraded weapons to lower Hell Charles's health low enough such that when you cross back over the old wooden bridge that you placed explosives on earlier, Charles is blown sky high and killed by a large wooden spike in a cinematic shot that looks really incredible as the credits begin to roll and the game ends. Choo Choo Charles is a very well written and detailed open world horror indie game that really gives some full blown studios a run for their money. It has some serious and genuine thought put into almost every detail. The game is a mid-length open world that has some good replayability value, and I would definitely urge you to go check it out, or at least watch some of the development logs over on TwoStar's channel, since this game really deserves all the support it can get based upon the clearly massive amount of work put into it. Although it may have some slight issues, and I would obviously love it to have a longer playtime, there is no point in even pretending that that decreases its value as a true indie horror classic that represents what is possible in the game dev scene.